So much stuff was happening when it comes to the WNBA CBA. The WNBA has told the WNBPA and its teams ought to be completed by March 10th for the 2026 schedule not to be impacted.
The WNBA has established a firm deadline of March 10 to reach a new collective bargaining agreement. This date represents a critical threshold for the 2026 season. If a deal is not signed by then, the league faces a significant disruption that could stall its recent momentum.
And this is essentially the drop-dead date that Adam Silver was referring to. He was talking about the WNBA CBA at NBA All-Star. We are reaching the 11th hour. He said at that time that he wasn't ready to set a drop-dead date, but now
this negotiation is taking place during a period of unprecedented growth for the league, often referred to as the Caitlin Clark era, making the stakes for players, owners, and fans particularly high. Shortly before setting the March deadline, the WNBA announced that it had met the revenue benchmarks required to trigger player payouts for the first time in its history.
Yes, we still have 2 months, but you still have 3 drafts to do, 2 expansion team drafts, and then obviously the WNBA draft. This March 10th date is just for them to get a handshake agreement.
The league has allocated an $8 million pool for this purpose, which provides approximately $50,000 per player. While the payout appears to be a success for the current model, the timing of the announcement has been viewed with skepticism by those within the labor movement.
Even if we have a handshake agreement, things still have to go through lawyers. It has sometimes takes, at minimum, a week. 1 day prior to this, for the first time in history, the WNBA generated enough revenue in 2025 to trigger revenue sharing with its players.
The Players' Union suggests that these bonuses may be an attempt to justify the existing financial system at a time when players are demanding structural changes. A primary point of contention in these negotiations is the methodology used to share league revenue. Players are requesting 27.5% of gross revenue, calculated before the league accounts for operating expenses. In response, the league has offered 70% of net revenue, which is the profit remaining after all expenses are deducted. The Players' Union argues that under the league's proposed formula, their actual share would fall below 15% of total revenue.
The 13 teams will receive a total of $8 million from the league to disperse among players. That's about $50K per player. It means that the league is growing. It means that the momentum that we have all seeing has translated into money.
League officials maintain that meeting the players' demands would result in hundreds of millions of dollars in losses, suggesting that the league's current growth model is not yet profitable enough to sustain such a split. The dispute also extends to player benefits, specifically regarding housing. For decades, WNBA teams have been required to provide housing for their players to offset the cost of living in expensive urban markets. However, the league's latest proposal seeks to phase out this benefit entirely by 2028.
Does this mean that the league is profitable? No, I couldn't find any reports that, and it definitely doesn't matter when it comes to the players because they're gonna get paid regardless, and then the very next day they drop a drop-dead date.
For many athletes, particularly those on rookie contracts, losing this provision would require them to find and fund their own housing in cities like New York or San Francisco, where the cost of living may rival their base salaries. These unresolved labor issues are creating logistical complications for the 2026 season. 2 new expansion franchises, the Toronto Tempo and the Portland Fire, are currently unable to hire staff or sign players. Because no collective bargaining agreement is in place, the league cannot move forward with an expansion draft. Furthermore, 80% of current players are effectively in free agency limbo. With the draft scheduled for April 13th, a failure to meet the March 10 deadline would result in a severely compressed off-season and significant administrative instability.
I think this is basically the league saying, like, look at this momentum that we have. You guys are actually able to get, you just made 50K that none of you guys were expecting. Do not halt this momentum. Hey, even if we don't give you gross revenue, you're going to get paid.
The financial viability of the league has also been questioned by figures in the NBA. Mark Cuban recently suggested that the WNBA's current business model is fundamentally flawed. Cuban proposed that the league should consider moving toward a model similar to collegiate NIL programs, which would allow players to receive direct compensation from local sponsors and donors rather than relying strictly on the league's internal salary structure. He characterized the current professional model as a non-starter if it cannot meet player valuation. Unlike in previous negotiations, the players now have access to domestic alternatives. New leagues such as Unrivaled and Athletes Unlimited offer competitive salaries and equity opportunities.
The difference between the two, the gross sharing model is the players get paid of basically all of the revenue that is coming in. Net revenue is essentially the players getting paid after the WNBA takes in the revenue and pays their expenses. So I feel like this was very strategic on the WNBA's part.
Reducing the WNBA's leverage as the sole provider of professional women's basketball in the United States. Internal resolve among the players is high, with 98% of the union voting to authorize a strike. This mandate indicates a willingness to halt the 2026 season if the final agreement does not reflect the players' market value. As the March 10 deadline approaches, the gap between the league and the players remains substantial. If the parties fail to reach a compromise on revenue sharing and housing benefits, the WNBA faces the prospect of the first work stoppage in its history. While owners are betting that players will move to protect the league's momentum, the players are betting that the league's current popularity makes it too important to fail.
And I think if we look back at 2025, Caitlin Clark wasn't even healthy that entire season. And could you imagine if on top of that, Caitlin Clark played every single game like she did during her rookie season? The Golden State Valkyries, who was a brand new expansion team, they sold out every single home game. The Golden State Valkyries exceeded everyone's expectations as their first year in the WNBA.
The outcome of this boardroom dispute will determine whether the 2026 season proceeds as planned or if the league's growth will be stalled by a total shutdown. The current stalemate is rooted in a fundamental disagreement over how the league's newfound cultural capital should be converted into financial equity. This tension escalated significantly following the announcement of a landmark 11-year media rights agreement valued at approximately $2.2 billion. Under this deal, which involves Disney, Amazon, and NBC, the league's annual media revenue is set to jump from roughly $60 million to $200 million starting in 2026. While Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has characterized this as a transformative win that ensures the league's long-term stability, the Players Association views it as the baseline for a complete overhaul of the compensation structure.
First time they triggered a benchmark was in 2025. You have not one but two new expansion teams. If these two expansion teams have even a fraction of the amount of hype around them,
the union argues that the 2020 collective bargaining agreement was negotiated in a vacuum, before the explosion of viewership metrics and jersey sales that defined the 2024 season. By opting out of that deal a year early, the players signaled that they no longer accept the growth phase justifications that previously kept salaries capped at a fraction of those seen in other professional sports. Central to the financial dispute is the concept of shared services and the league's ongoing financial interdependence with the NBA. For nearly 3 decades, the WNBA has operated with significant administrative and financial support from its brother league, leading to a complex web of accounting that players now want to untangle. The league maintains that it is still technically operating at a loss when accounting for the massive capital investments required to scale operations, including the $75 million capital raise conducted in 2022. From the league's perspective, the revenue being generated today is being reinvested into the infrastructure of tomorrow, upgrading arena technologies, expanding marketing departments, and funding the very expansion teams that are currently in limbo. However, the players' legal team is questioning the transparency of these reinvestments. They are seeking a forensic look at the books to determine how much of the net revenue is being suppressed by internal management fees paid back to the NBA or allocated toward executive bonuses rather than the labor force that drives the product. This lack of transparency has created a trust deficit that extends to the prioritization rule, a controversial clause in the previous agreement that has become a major flashpoint. The rule requires players with more than 2 years of experience to return from their overseas assignments by the start of WNBA training camp or face heavy fines and eventual suspension. Historically, WNBA players have relied on lucrative contracts in Europe and China to supplement their modest domestic salaries, often earning 5 to 10 times their WNBA pay while playing abroad. The league implemented prioritization to ensure its stars were present for the full domestic season, arguing that year-round availability is necessary to attract major sponsors. The players, however, view it as a restrictive measure that limits their earning potential without providing a domestic salary high enough to compensate for the loss of overseas income. In the upcoming negotiations, the union is expected to demand the total abolition of the prioritization clause or a massive increase in the supermax salary, which currently sits at approximately $242,000, to make staying in the U.S. year-round a viable financial choice. The expansion of the league to 15 and eventually 16 teams adds another layer of complexity to the labor talks. While the addition of franchises in San Francisco, Toronto, and Portland is a sign of health, it also highlights the 144 problem, the strict limit on roster spots that has seen elite talent waived during training camps simply because there is no room under the hard salary cap. The union is pushing for expanded rosters, moving from the current 12-player limit to 14 or 15, and the creation of a developmental league or practice squad similar to those in the NBA. They argue that as the level of talent in the college game rises, the WNBA's refusal to expand roster sizes is a form of artificial scarcity that keeps veteran wages depressed and prevents rookies from establishing long-term careers. The league's counter-argument focuses on the dilution of product, claiming that a rapid increase in roster spots would strain the salary pool and potentially lower the overall quality of play. Beyond the immediate financial terms, the negotiations are delving into long-term health and retirement security. WNBA players currently lack the robust pension plans and post-career medical benefits found in the NBA or NFL. As the physical demands of the game increase with longer schedules and more intensive travel, the union is making lifelong wellness a non-negotiable pillar of the 2026 agreement. This includes demands for improved mental health resources, specialized care for veteran players, and guaranteed maternity leave policies that don't count against a team's salary cap. The housing heist mentioned in earlier proposals is viewed by the union as a bellwether for a broader attempt by the league to offload its social and physical responsibilities to the players. By attempting to shift housing costs to the athletes, the league is essentially asking them to take a pay cut in real-world dollars as the cost of living in WNBA markets continues to outpace the modest annual increases in the base salary. The geopolitical landscape has also shifted the leverage in favor of the players. In previous decades, the Russian Premier League was the primary destination for WNBA stars looking for million-dollar paychecks. Following the detention of Brittany Griner and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, that market has effectively closed to American players. This has forced a reckoning within the WNBA. With the Russian safety net gone, the domestic league can no longer rely on external markets to subsidize its low wages. Players are now looking at the WNBA as their primary employer rather than a secondary summer job, and they are demanding a contract that reflects that reality. This shift is what led to the 98% strike authorization vote. The players are no longer afraid of killing the golden goose, because they believe the goose has been hoarding the gold for 30 years. The role of Commissioner Kathy Engelbert is particularly scrutinized in this environment. As a former CEO of Deloitte, her approach has been one of corporate scaling and data-driven growth. She has successfully increased the league's valuation and secured the aforementioned media deal, but critics within the union argue that her business-first mindset has come at the expense of the labor-first culture required to sustain a professional sports league. The players feel that the league's leadership is treating them like assets on a balance sheet rather than partners in a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. This ideological divide is perhaps the most difficult gap to bridge. While the league points to 200% increases in viewership as proof that their strategy is working, the players point to those same numbers as proof that they are being vastly underpaid for the value they generate. The looming March 10 deadline is not just a procedural date, it is a hard wall for the 2026 business cycle. Sponsorship renewals for major partners like Nike, AT&T, and Google are often tied to the certainty of a full season. If a strike or lockout appears imminent, these corporations may trigger force majeure clauses or delay payments, further straining the league's cash flow. The owners, a group that now includes high-profile investors like Joe Lacob and Matt Ishbia, are accustomed to the aggressive labor negotiations of the NBA, but they are operating with much thinner margins in the WNBA. The risk for the owners is that a prolonged work stoppage could alienate the new younger fan base that was drawn in by the 2024 draft class. These fans have shown a deep loyalty to individual players over teams, and if the stars are off the court, there is no guarantee that the Caitlin Clark effect will survive a year of darkness. As the clock winds down, the focus remains on the specific language of the net revenue definition. If the league can be forced to cap its deductible expenses, limiting how much of the revenue can be hidden in operations, a deal might be reached. If, however, the league continues to insist on a model where the players only get a share of what is left over after the NBA is paid back for its historical losses, the 2026 season will likely begin on the picket line. The players have spent the last 2 years building a platform of unprecedented influence, and they appear prepared to use that influence to break the existing model entirely. The question remains whether the league's traditional power structures can adapt to a workforce that knows exactly how much it is worth and is no longer willing to wait for the future to be paid. The current labor environment is being shaped by the standards set in other domestic women's professional leagues. The National Women's Soccer League recently moved to eliminate the college draft and implement a system centered on free agency, a move that the WNBA Players Association is monitoring as they seek greater autonomy for their own athletes. While the WNBA has historically operated as a closed system with high barriers to entry, the success of the NWSL's market-driven approach has provided a contemporary benchmark for what a modern women's sports labor agreement can look like. This shift in the broader sports landscape has emboldened players to demand the removal of the hard cap system that currently governs team spending. Under the current hard cap, WNBA teams are strictly prohibited from exceeding the salary limit, regardless of their willingness to pay luxury taxes. In contrast, the NBA utilizes a soft cap with various exceptions that allow teams to retain their own stars. The WNBA's rigid structure often forces franchises to waive productive veteran players or carry rosters of only 11 players to remain compliant with the league's financial rules. The union is arguing that this system artificially suppresses wages and prevents teams from building the kind of long-term roster continuity that drives fan engagement. By moving toward a soft cap or increasing the luxury tax threshold, the league could allow its wealthiest owners to reinvest their profits directly into player personnel, though the league office remains concerned that this would widen the gap between high-market and low-market teams. The uncertainty of the 2026 season is also placing a strain on the WNBA Changemakers program, a collective of high-level corporate sponsors including Nike, Google, and AT&T. These partners have integrated the league's growth into their own long-term marketing strategies, and a work stoppage would disrupt multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns scheduled to run during the summer months. Internal reports suggest that these sponsors are seeking assurances that their investments will be protected. If the March 10 deadline passes without a deal, the league risks a cooling of the corporate interest that has been essential to its recent valuation spikes. The Players' Union is aware of this corporate pressure and is using it as leverage, pointing out that the league's changemaker partners are essentially sponsoring a labor model that the players describe as antiquated. Legal experts have suggested that if negotiations remain stalled, the union could pursue more aggressive tactics, such as decertification. This is a strategy previously utilized by NBA and NFL players to dissolve their unions and file antitrust lawsuits against their respective leagues. While decertification is a high-risk maneuver that would remove the players' collective bargaining protections, it would also strip the league of its labor exemption from antitrust laws. This would allow players to challenge the legality of the draft and the salary cap in federal court. While both sides hope to avoid litigation, the mere possibility of an antitrust challenge adds a layer of legal risk that the league's board of governors must weigh against the cost of the players' financial demands. The true point of no return for the 2026 season may not be the March 10 deadline, but the April 13 draft. Television broadcasters and arena operators require significant lead time to finalize schedules and production logistics. If a collective bargaining agreement is not in place by the time the draft is scheduled to occur, the operational window for a full season effectively closes. This timeline leaves the league and the players with a narrow window to resolve deep-seated disagreements over revenue sharing, housing, and roster expansion.
All of it being rushed is still better than a season not happening at all or a season being delayed. Mark Cuban actually posted a tweet. The WNBA's structure is never going to work out as it is, and it needs to be more like the college structure. And he also alluded to the fact that a lot of players build their names in college and are actually making more money in college.
As the deadline approaches, the focus is shifting from broad ideological debates to the technical specifics of a bridge agreement that could prevent a total shutdown while long-term financial structures are finalized.